Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, July the 4th, 2024. Happy birthday, America! And in this video, I want to look at America, or specifically the United States of America. And I wanted to be quite general about it. I didn't want to focus on any particular news story or look at Donald Trump's chart in detail or Joe Biden's chart. I just wanted to look at America in general, and what I really wanted to do was just look at the chart. Look at that chart set for July the 4th, 1776. I've gone for 5:10 p.m., which is supposedly the time at which the Declaration of Independence was signed, and to see what this chart really says about the personality of the United States. And I take the view that as the United States gets older, the more it becomes like its chart. You know, I've spent a long time looking at this chart. There's not everything in it that I fully understand, but I do feel that I'm slowly getting there. And at the same time, I want to look broadly at some of the big events, astrologically at least, that are happening to the United States in the short term. But again, in quite a general sense, I don't really want to focus in specific detail on anything like, the elections or nominations or anything like that. But before I look at the United States, I want to consider what is happening today on Thursday, July the 4th, 2024. So here is the chart for today, set for noon, July the 4th, July the 4th, 2024, in New York. Now, of course, for people outside the United States, it's just another day. And so in many respects, when I look at today, it is just going to be just another day. People go to work and so forth. So as far as the main events are concerned, well, actually, I don't think that it's a particularly exciting day. There's the moon at noon, is at 27:18 Gemini. So the moon is about to change signs, about to go from Gemini to Cancer. It makes a square to Neptune. It's always interesting with that moon in Gemini square Neptune in Pisces, because it's quite a different set of energies. You've got moon in Gemini, which is a placement perhaps connected with the mind, how we communicate. We're trying to be rational perhaps, but then there's Neptune. It can be rather confusing, can't it? We think we know what we're going to say, but when the words come out, they come out differently, and we might give the wrong impression. And emotionally, moon square Neptune, some of us might get confused. It may be difficult to really work out what exactly is going on. And just before the moon makes a square to Neptune, it actually makes a square to Saturn. And that moon square Saturn is going to be more of an issue if you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand. And that moon square Saturn could be something of a limitation. We're trying to do something, we're trying to get our words out, but it just doesn't happen, and we may feel a certain amount of frustration. But it's not a particularly big deal. Moon makes its square to Saturn, then it moves on. The moon does actually make a square aspect of a Saturn-Neptune midpoint. So there could be moments of fear. I mean, I don't mean super fear, like, there's some monster chasing you or anything like that, but just a fear about what should be done, a concern that if we act act out what we, how we really want to be, if we try to be ourselves, that somehow we're going to attract adverse attention. At the same time, we want to dissolve into something, but we don't want to dissolve into something because we're afraid. So we're just going to be perhaps in a state of inertia, maybe. But we have to remember that the moon it's a fast-moving planet. Okay, I know it's not a planet, it's a satellite. And then the moon does move into Gemini. So as far as when it moves into Gemini, as far as I can see, moon moves into Gemini at London time at 21:51, which would be 9 minutes to 10, just before 10 o'clock in the evening. So have I got that right? Moon's from Gemini to Cancer. Let me get that right. So moon moves into Cancer at just before 10 o'clock in the evening, London time. So that's just before 5 o'clock in the afternoon, New York time, East Coast, and that would be just before 2 in the afternoon if you're on the West Coast, even earlier if you're in Alaska or New Zealand, or Alaska or Hawaii. So if you're in the Americas, certainly it is kind of a day of two halves. The moon, you start the day, moon in Gemini, wanting variety, doing this, doing that, not quite sure what you want to put your energy into, perhaps wanting to do two different things. And I know people in the United States may be celebrating, or I don't know what they do, fireworks, barbecues, all that kind of July the 4th stuff. But it might be a good idea to plan two different things if you're in the United States with the moon in Gemini. Moon in Gemini suggests you want variety, but then towards the end of the day, as the moon goes into Cancer, the atmosphere does change. You perhaps become more family oriented. America's United States is supposed to be a big family country, isn't it? I mean, it is a Cancerian country, so moon moving into Cancer. It can be a bit of sentimentality towards the end of the day. So there is that change. Now, strangely, there isn't much going on the surface, but as far as what is the most important aspect today, well, I have to say it, but I think the most important aspect today is an aspect involving Hades. Now, let me show you what I mean here on this chart. Let me just put the hypothetical planets in. These are Vita's hypothetical planets, and can you see that? Hades. That's like, see a little cross there, like a bit like a cemetery. So there is a Sun-Hades conjunction today. Now, Hades is a slow-moving planet. It's been sort of around 13 Cancer for some time. Maybe we're talking about years, but today, yeah, there is this exact Sun-Hades conjunction, and it's also on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. You can see that there is Mars, there is Jupiter, so we've got, roughly speaking, we've got Sun and Hades are semi-square the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. So that Sun in Hades is not great. And I'm not making any specific statement about the United States yet, but with that Sun-Hades conjunction, it may be a day when things are happening that aren't particularly nice. Probably doesn't affect us, but it's just things that may be dubious, criminal, unpleasant. It's just happening, and we can't avoid it. We can't help but notice it. And with that Sun-Hades aspecting the Mars-Jupiter midpoint, I'm somewhat concerned that might indicate that in certain quarters, people might be putting a lot of energy into maybe criminal activities, activities that are unpleasant. And if we put too much energy into anything, then we have to be careful with that Hades on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. Mars-Jupiter can be a very difficult pairing because Mars and Jupiter is just putting too much into something and it goes wrong. So you throw Hades onto the Mars-Jupiter midpoint, we think it's okay to put a lot of energy into something and then it doesn't work at all. And that's particularly the case if we're doing something that is unpleasant and it's not us doing the stuff or someone out there is doing something that is unpleasant or violent. If I don't know if you're messing around with fireworks today with Hades on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint, then things could go wrong. Of course, you won't be messing around with fireworks. It will be someone else, won't it? It's just a dangerous time. So let me just look at Alfred Witter and see what he has to say about Hades on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint to give you perhaps a flavour of it. He reckons betrothal with difficulties, bad or mediocre results or work accomplishments, fruits which one does not harvest. So he's actually not talking about the violent aspects of it. He's just seeing it about Mars-Jupiter as about trying to do things and just not being successful at it. We put a lot of energy into something and it just doesn't happen. I don't know. It could be that you put a lot of effort into celebrating today, if you're American, and it just doesn't work out. So maybe it's just not a time to be putting too much effort into anything. Don't take anything too seriously. Don't think that anything can be done perfectly, because in a way, the more energy you put into something, the more you want it to be wonderful, the less wonderful it will be. So perhaps you should take just a relaxed approach. Nothing perhaps today, or few things today, are going to be worth your energy. So as far as the heliocentric picture is concerned, so let's we don't really need hypothetical planets here. So let's actually remove the hypothetical planets. Now, I will be talking more about Hades, don't worry. I think it is relevant. We shouldn't forget, but the United States has got a solar return. I think actually the solar return is tomorrow, but I'll be looking at that very soon. So looking at the heliocentric perspective, okay, that is the noon positions for today. From the perspective of the sun being at the center of the solar system, the Earth is still square Mars. So if you're messing around with anything dangerous, fireworks, anything that can go bang, explosives, it's just not a good time to be doing that, because things could just so easily go wrong. It is a violent combination of square Mars, and Mars is about explosions. It's about fire. So anything to do with fireworks, I think you have to be pretty careful today. I mean, I know that the Earth square Mars has actually reached peak a couple of days ago. It is starting to move away from that square, but I still think it could be a bit of a problem, and people could get angry. I suppose, especially if you're in the United States, because Independence Day is a holiday, and holidays are always dangerous, aren't they? Holidays, people have got perhaps too much time on their hands. But again, it's probably not you. It's other people out there who are less responsible, who you probably don't have anything to do with. So that shouldn't be a problem. But just bear in mind, people could be more angry than usual today. And notice that Venus is opposition Pluto. Venus is moving away from the opposition of Pluto, but because it's a heliocentric chart, Venus is going faster than it would be if it was a geocentric chart. So I think that Venus-Pluto opposition could indicate perhaps some level of intensity. Whenever people get close to each other, there could be strong feelings. There could be a power struggle. That is possible. And Venus is also the planet of money. So Venus opposition Pluto heliocentrically, there could be issues about money, people wanting control over their money, and maybe begrudging expenditure. So that is something to consider, and maybe, if possible, financial matters should be avoided. Okay, this Venus opposition Pluto is separating, but it's still there to some extent. Though overall, I would not have said that the heliocentric picture is especially exciting. And now I'm just going to turn to the 12 signs, and I'm going to do my forecasts for the 12 signs for today. Now, remember that there isn't actually much going on astrologically. That's not to say it's going to be an uneventful day, but if I look at things astrologically, there's not a great deal to report. And so I'm kind of hoping that my forecasts will be relatively brief. So let's see what's going on. So let's move to the regular picture. There it is. And these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Thursday, July the 4th, 2024. Aries, you do have things to say, and I suppose people are going to listen, but I wouldn't take anything too seriously. I don't think that people are going to really engage. They might give the impression that they're hearing you, but I think they're going to be distracted. And, you might be trying very hard to get your message across, but I think it's going to be hard work. And the more words you use, perhaps the more difficult it will become. And I think that, you may be a bit angry about it, certainly annoyed, because you're just not having much of an impact. But maybe the problem, Aries, is that you're expecting too much. You're expecting results. And Aries, I don't think that you should be expecting results. You should instead be focusing on just creating the right impression, making sure that everyone is happy. Whether or not you get appreciation, that's beside the point. And I do think that by using your energy in a sort of fairly low profile way, just being there, giving out good vibes, you can make things happen in a sense of bringing people together. I think that's something you can definitely do today. But you mustn't have any specific ideas about how to bring people together. It's enough that you can get one person to talk to another person, and that might lead to something else. So in fact, you might be actually quite a good host today, or hostess. I suppose it depends on the situation, doesn't it? But you can organize low profile meetings, get-togethers, even parties, but provided you don't have any expectations. That's really important. It's enough that people come together and communicate. And as the day progresses, you just may feel that things aren't really going anywhere. And then there will be a change, especially if you are in the Americas. So if you're in the Americas, the moon will move from Gemini to Cancer. And so with the moon moving from Gemini to Cancer, well, in the United States, that's this afternoon. Over the course of the afternoon, you get this change, and you experience this change as things becoming perhaps more intense and maybe a little more intimate, because the moon is in Gemini. That's quite I don't know, it's fairly flexible. It doesn't want to focus on any one thing. Then it moves into Cancer. And Cancer is about emotion, it's about families, it's about intimacy, it's about people trusting each other. And I think that people are going to have a preference for close friends rather than for random acquaintances. So if you are in America, as the day progresses, you're going to want to withdraw, but I don't mean withdraw in the sense of isolation. It's just you're going to want to withdraw and be with people who you know and trust. For example, your family, and your own home is going to become especially important for you. Taurus, you do recognize that the world is somewhat problematic, and whatever's going on in your life, you are kind of painfully aware that things are not right elsewhere. And I think you're perhaps more sensitive than usual towards the suffering of others. And I'm thinking particularly of people suffering on the other side of the world. You can just feel it. Now, if you are of a sensitive disposition, you might not, for example, want to watch the news or watch documentaries. There's always a documentary you can find about injustice. And so if you watch documentaries about injustices, wherever it might be, it's going to really get to you. So maybe, Taurus, you might not want to think too much. I mean, ignorance is bliss, but maybe not. I mean, I don't really think ignorance is bliss. I think you need to understand the world in all its complexities and just look around you and just see that really things are far from being perfect. And that might be the main thing going on today. And whatever's going on in your own personal, private life may be beside the point. But it does seem that I suppose many Taurians are going to be concerned about money. Money might be important, especially if you're in Australia or New Zealand, East Asia, because there is a square between the moon and Saturn. And that square between the moon and Saturn could put a focus on money and just realizing that financial matters just really aren't as good as they should be. Or at least that's the way you'll feel. And you just might be aware of the ways in which your freedom of action is being limited by simply not having enough money. At least that's how you feel. Though I suppose on the plus side, if you feel you haven't got enough money or you feel you need more money, at least you are motivated to do something about it. You can take note of something, and maybe it'll become clear to you that in some ways you're perhaps spending too much money, and that perhaps money needs to be restricted. Maybe you need to start saving and not spend so much. And this is a subjective feeling, and it doesn't really matter how objectively rich or poor you are. Money is always going to be important, and I think that is going to be a concern for many Taurians, especially, as I said, if they're in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia. And then the moon does make a square to Neptune, and again, there is a financial aspect to that, which I think is going to affect everyone, regardless of where they are. And that moon square Neptune, yes, money is important, but there might be moments where we just lose touch with money. We just can't really focus on it, and some of the details wash over us, and we might reach for wrong conclusions about money, perhaps, or in certain cases, we might make a financial mistake. So today I would suggest, Taurus, that you don't make big financial decisions, because there's a good chance that they are the wrong decisions. So really do consider that. The moon goes into Cancer, though, and I think that that's possibly a bit of a relief. So when does the moon go into Cancer? Well, if you're in London, it goes into Cancer at sort of 10 to almost 10 o'clock in the evening. So by that time you've missed it. So really, Australia, Africa, Europe, that moon moving into Cancer doesn't really affect you. But in the Americas, moon going into Cancer does have an impact, and I think it's quite gentle. I think that you're going to find towards the end of the day, if you're in the Americas, that things become calmer. There's less that you have to worry about. You're not thinking so much about stuff, and I don't think you're thinking so much about money, and you're perhaps able to sort of relax with people you trust. And I suppose if it's an Independence Day issue, small gatherings, very small gatherings, perhaps just your family, are the way to finish Independence Day on the best note. Gemini. The moon starts the day in your sign, in Gemini, and it ends the day in Cancer. So with the moon in Gemini, you feel that there are things to be done, and I think that you're looking for variety. There are lots of things you'd like to do, or maybe there's certainly two things you want to do, because Gemini is the twins. It's a double-bodied sign, supposedly. So you always want to have two options. And so maybe that's important today, having two choices. Don't just focus on one thing, because maybe if you focus on one thing, there could be a cancellation. Are you putting all your eggs in one basket? So always have a plan B. I mean, Geminis in general should always have a plan B, regardless of what's going on in the sky. But I think today it's especially important to have that plan B. And with the moon making a semi-square to Neptune, this could be about confused plans. You don't quite know what you're doing. You don't quite know where you're going. There is a danger that some Geminis get a bit lost. So if you're traveling, for example, make sure you know where you're going. You know where you're going. You know that you understand your GPS, that you got the address right. So that's one way in which the moon square Neptune could be working. If you are working in a career sense or a business sense today, then I think you really will feel that moon square Neptune. That moon square Neptune could be about just not quite knowing what you're supposed to be doing, and finding that the signals you receive from other people, whether they be employers, clients, employees, is just very confused and mixed, and no one quite knows what they're supposed to be doing. So, Gemini, it might be a bad day for making decisions. Because if you make a decision, particularly a single decision, a single rigid decision, going to do this, then very soon afterwards you might realize that this decision is based on a load of false assumptions, and then you have to change your mind. Okay, it's not the end of the world. I suppose Geminis are quite good at changing their mind, but it is really something that you need to consider. Now, as far as socializing is concerned, I understand that perhaps in the United States it might be a day for socializing. I don't really understand what it means, July the 4th. I don't really get it. I suppose I've been in this country 12 years, but I'm still an alien. And so I don't really quite get it. I don't quite understand its social importance. I understand its historical importance, but I don't really get its social importance. But it does seem that there's scope, Gemini, for meeting quite a lot of different people, and meeting people who perhaps behave in a rather unexpected way, a way that might be disturbing, but might be very interesting. So if you are meeting people today, particularly in a social sense, don't have expectations. They could surprise you, and they may behave in ways that you just simply weren't expecting, and that needn't be a bad thing, provided you're open-minded and you are a typical Gemini. Then, at the end of the day, the moon moves out of Gemini into Cancer. Okay, that's going to be late evening if you're in Europe. It's going to be tomorrow if you're in Asia, Australia, or New Zealand. But when the moon moves into Cancer, I think that there is less focus on you, and you just may feel that you're not the center of attention, but perhaps there's less pressure as well, and you can start focusing perhaps on things that matter, maybe. I mean, whenever the moon goes into Cancer, Geminis often start to think about money and what they have and what they don't have. That's one aspect of the moon moving into Cancer. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to be the case. It's perhaps more about the moon not being in Gemini rather than the moon being in Cancer. And I think with the moon not being in Gemini, there is less focus on you. But tomorrow, as the moon continues its movement through Cancer, there may be thoughts about money. There may be a few issues relating to money that maybe need to be dealt with. And, we shouldn't forget that tomorrow there is a new moon in Cancer, and that new moon, from a Gemini perspective, could have financial implications. I mean, not necessarily in a bad sense. It may actually be a new beginning for you when you can start to, reconsider what your financial priorities actually are. Cancer. The moon is moving into your sign at some stage today, or maybe tomorrow. I suppose it rather depends where you are. So if you're in the Americas, then this afternoon the moon moves into Cancer. If you're in Europe, moon moves into Cancer late this evening. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, then the moon will move into Cancer tomorrow. So it is a time of transition. And if you are an American Cancerian and Independence Day matters to you in a social sense, that might give you a sense of a sense of your planning and when you want to actually turn up to things. So from an American perspective, while the moon is in Gemini, you probably don't want to be doing very much. It's not a time for socializing. It's not a time for meeting people, mixing with them, because it will just feel unsatisfactory, and you won't be yourself. So if you are going to events, do people go for events? Maybe they don't. I don't know what happens on, as I said, I don't really know what happens on Independence Day, even though I live in the United States. But from an American perspective, if you are in Eastern Standard Time, Moon doesn't go into Cancer until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. If you're in California, it doesn't, or just before 5 o'clock in the afternoon. If you're in California, what goes into Cancer sort of just before 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But before the Moon goes into Cancer, just don't do anything, I would suggest, and only bother going out, only bother socializing, mixing with people when the moon actually changes sign. Because when the moon changes sign, you're going to feel a lot more confident, and you'll just feel comfortable that finally you've arrived. While the moon is in Gemini, it's just going to be annoying. There's going to be lots of trivial nonsense, and you're just not going to be yourself. So I think for Cancerians, it's just going to be very important to get your timing right. Now, if you're not in the United States, or certainly if you're not in the Americas, and you're in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Africa, then just perhaps bide your time today. And don't feel that you have to commit yourself, especially as the moon is making a square to Neptune. Now, actually, that moon square Neptune does actually affect everyone, regardless of where you are, even if you're in the Americas. So you've got the moon in very late Gemini, squaring Neptune. And this can be a time when Cancerians are certainly sensitive, and it's always good to be sensitive, but you could be oversensitive to the point of being rather confused. You're just not quite sure what you're supposed to. You're not quite sure what you're supposed to be doing, and there's a lot of information coming your way, but making sense of that information could be really hard work. And at a certain point, you might become overwhelmed and somewhat unsure of yourself. Is this the right thing to do? Have you really understood what's going on correctly? Maybe you haven't. And so certainly if you're not in the Americas, there's a good case today for not really doing anything at all. Certainly not doing anything that is important, and not taking the initiative. And that moon square Neptune. Remember, Neptune is stationary retrograde. It's come to a standstill at 29:56 Pisces, and so there are moments of real sensitivity when it's just so easy to get things wrong, and it's also so easy to get lost and to reach the wrong conclusions. So a bit of caution is required there, Cancer. But if you are in the Americas, when the moon does move into your sign, then there is a big change, and I think it will be a change for the better. Leo, the sun is your ruler, and the sun is aspecting the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. It's also making a conjunction to Hades. And because of that, Leo, I would be careful. Now, it might sound fun for the sun to be on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. In fact, I think it's making a semi-square to the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. So this semi-square to the Mars-Jupiter midpoint involving the sun could encourage you to put a lot of energy into something. It just might feel like it's the right thing to do. But I think in this situation, it's probably the wrong thing to do. You haven't got all the energy in the world. And if you were to put what energy you have into something, then it's unlikely to work out. In fact, the more energy you put into something, firstly, the more likely it is that you're going to get exhausted. And secondly, the more likely it is that you're going to make some kind of a mistake. And matters are not helped by the fact that the sun is conjunct Hades. Now, Hades is a hypothetical planet. Now, you could take the view that Hades, hypothetical planets that don't exist, it's just a waste of time. It's just me deluding myself and deluding you. But I have reason to believe that Hades works. So you might as well be cautious. You put a lot of energy into something, it doesn't work. The more seriously you take it, the more likely it is to go wrong. And that's Hades. So I would suggest that you don't put a lot of effort into any one thing. At the very least, you'll be disappointed. Now, if you're putting effort into something dangerous, then all the more so. I mean, if you're organising a firework display, well, you're asking for trouble. If you're organising anything that could be dangerous, that just might not work out, then I don't know. I think you are taking a risk. So, Leo, I would advise you to conserve your energy. And at the same time, with the sun making a conjunction to Hades, be very careful who you associate with. You know, if you're meeting people that you haven't met before, you don't know them, there's a good chance that there'll be people around who you don't want to know. So why risk it? Just something about their influence is going to be quite negative. And it goes without saying that anything to do with criminality should be really avoided. And another point is that garbage might upset you. I don't know, it might be your garbage, someone else's garbage, the way garbage is being created. And you'll just notice garbage more than usual today. And that could be a little bit of a bother for you. But for your part, you can't really control what other people are doing. But make sure that you are not creating garbage, because I think with Sun conjunct Hades, there's some danger there that you could create garbage without even knowing you're creating garbage. So that is something to consider. Now, as far as your social life, I know that if you're a Leo in the United States, you might think that it's a good time to socialize. I'm not really convinced it is, actually. The moon is moving from Gemini into Cancer. So moon in Gemini is making a square to Neptune. That would indicate moon square Neptune perhaps being disappointed by other people, disappointed by your friends. Go to a party, get disappointed. Going to the wrong party, feeling you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then the moon goes into Cancer, moves from Gemini, late Gemini, moon makes that square to Neptune. Then it moves into Cancer. And then, Cancer is a fairly low profile sign from a Leo perspective. You're going to want to enjoy your own company. You want to be in the center of things. So I have to be honest with you, Leo. I would have said that today is a day for just keeping a low profile and not taking any risks. And just remember, you've got a limited amount of energy. And if you do feel that you need to focus all your energy into one thing, it might go wrong. So I would suggest, Leo, that you hold back. Virgo, you can't expect everything to go to plan today. Now, I don't necessarily mean that in a sense of things going wrong. I'm just talking about you having rigid ideas. It is not a time, Virgo, to be having rigid ideas. And, if you've got careful plans, then consider the possibility that those careful plans might have to be changed. So be open to unexpected events and also to unexpected meetings. I know, Virgo, that you put a premium on stability and organization, but if you insist on meeting people for whatever reason, then you cannot have rigid expectations. People are going to be a law unto themselves. And at first sight, that might be disturbing, though it might actually be quite liberating as well. You meet someone who's unusual, who just gives you a completely different view of the world. And this view makes you think, makes you perhaps realize that you haven't got everything right and that some changes are required. But do be a little careful, because some people are unstable and are not reliable, and perhaps it's not a day for being too trusting, especially when you're dealing with strangers. Who can predict what they're going to do next? And I suppose that would especially be the case if you were going to parties or you're socializing. It's Independence Day. Yeah, things can certainly happen. And so do be careful on that score. At the same time, the moon is making a square to Neptune, and that matters. The moon and Neptune, from a Virgo perspective, they are angular houses. They're in angular houses. So Neptune is in Pisces, which is the opposite sign to Virgo. The moon is in Gemini, which is a sign which has a square aspect to Virgo. So when you've got moon square Neptune, things may suddenly become unclear. And I think this sort of supports this idea that other people can't entirely be trusted. And people might say things which they don't mean. In certain cases, they might just tell you lies. So whatever you hear should be treated with a pinch of salt. You need to get the evidence yourself and not assume that people are telling the truth. And if you've got careful plans, then people are unreliable. People are capable of being unreliable. So if you've got plans, do consider the possibility that those plans do have to be changed at very short notice. So a bit of flexibility can, I think, be useful. Now, if you are in the Americas, things get better when the moon changes sign, from when it moves from Gemini into Cancer. So when the moon goes into Cancer, which happens in the Americas over this afternoon, if not in the Americas, basically you can forget it. And the moon doesn't really go into Cancer until tomorrow. Okay, in the UK it goes into Cancer at just before 10 o'clock in the evening, but really that's a bit late, isn't it? So with the moon going into Cancer, for those of you in the Americas, I think things are just going to be a lot easier. Many of these problems that I've been talking about are going to start to dissipate, and you can be yourself more. And I think other people are going to become more trustworthy once the moon goes into Cancer. So if you're in the Americas, by this evening, the situation should have stabilized. And if you make the right choices, you can be surrounded by people who you trust. If they're people you've known for a long time, perhaps members of your family, then so much the better. So for American Cancerians, I would basically say that the day gets better as it goes along, and probably the evening would be the best. Did I say American Cancer? No, I meant American Virgos. Yeah, if you're an American Virgo, if you're an American Virgo, the day gets better as it goes along, and by this evening, things should be absolutely fine, but not exciting. You do not want excitement really today. I don't think really anyone wants excitement today. So Virgo, you do have to be a little careful, but I think it's just important not to trust anyone. It's important for everyone not to trust people. It's not a day really for trusting people, whoever you are. But I think that by this evening, certainly if you're in the Americas, you can be with people who can be trusted. Libra, you live in a troubled world. I mean, we all live in a troubled world, don't we? And when I tell you that we live in a troubled world, I'm not being personal. It's the same for you as it is with the other 11 signs. But I think you in particular are aware that we live in a troubled world. Today you can see through things. However good things seem on the surface, you know that it's not great. That it's not great for a lot of people out there. And in that sense, you may feel a certain amount of compassion, because you maybe just know that there are people out there who are suffering, and that may have an impact on your day. And that's especially the case if you're very tuned into the news. You see what's happening, you look around you. It would seem almost inappropriate to be celebrating anything. I mean, what is there to celebrate after all, Libra? At least that might be your view if you are plugged into what's going on in the world. Now, I do understand that some Librans do like to flit around the surface, not going into anything too deeply. You could do that if you wanted. Don't think it's entirely satisfactory, but that might be possible. So I suppose in one sense I would ask you, Libra, to get connected with the creation. Be part of everything. And yes, I suppose one can pick up on the suffering in the creative process, but that's the way it is, and that's the way forward for you, perhaps at this moment. But I'd say all this really in a positive sense. I suppose I'm kind of advocating that you are aware in a sort of a spiritual and humanitarian sense, but I do understand that there are other things going on. I mean, I have to say, with the moon moving through Gemini, certainly during the first part of the day, maybe all day, depending on where you are, with the moon moving through Gemini, there is still this spiritual sense to it all. The moon is, I know that Gemini is not a particularly spiritual sign, all things being equal, and I'm saying it as a Gemini. Still, it's square Neptune, And I think you can just feel things. And I suppose you don't want to over-feel things. And when you start to feel things, you may experience those feelings as thoughts which are just going from one place to another, and you can't fully relax. And then the moon is square Neptune, and that moon square Neptune does create a sense of, what is it all for? When you look at the big picture, how can you possibly be thinking about things which, are so trivial? Well, of course, if in the Americas, Independence Day, what is it? I mean, celebrating the birth of a nation. I mean, nothing lasts forever. Tragic empires rise and fall. Isn't that how the old hymn goes? Isn't there? There's a hymn talking about tragic empires. They rise and they fall. That's inevitable. That's the way it goes. So why celebrate something so transitory? But the moon does change sign. The moon changes sign from Gemini into Cancer. And this happens if you're in the Americas this afternoon. And in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, it happens pretty late in the day. But that probably happens tomorrow. In London, it doesn't happen until 10 to 10 in the evening. But if you're in the Americas with a moon changing sign from Gemini to Cancer, I think things become a bit easier when the moon moves into Cancer. I think, in a strange way, you become a little less sensitive. And that is strange, because the moon is, Cancer is an emotional sign, isn't it? It's a water sign. But I think in your case, when the moon moves into Cancer, it's easier to focus on things that you're familiar with. It's easier to not be focusing so much on what's happening in the rest of the world. You don't have to worry so much about other people's suffering, people who you're not directly connected with. And I think that with the moon moving into Cancer, you may feel a certain sense of purpose, that you can actually start to consider, what you're supposed to be doing. And you're probably going to be an easier person to deal with, because you're going to be more definite when the moon moves into Cancer. Though I still don't think that you're going to be in the mood for just doing nothing, enjoying yourself. I think you will actually feel there are things that need to be done. And as the moon moves into Cancer, if you are an American Libran, your attention might start to focus towards not today, but tomorrow, and what needs to happen tomorrow. And you may think that you don't really want to waste time socializing, having fun. It just might seem inappropriate. But perhaps for different reasons, beginning of the day, you were worrying about the suffering of the world. By the end of the day, you're perhaps being more self-focused, thinking about your ambitions. And I think that is fine. And, it is just, it's just a beginning. And it just is also a reminder that we can be in two places at the same time. We can be very focused on ourselves and on our selfish ambitions, but then at the same time, we can be thinking about the world and the suffering all around us, and somehow those two thoughts can occupy the same space. But really, Libra, what I'm kind of saying is, it may not actually be an especially dramatic day. And if socializing matters to you, if you want to meet people, I don't think you have to put in the effort. I think someone else will put in the effort for you. So perhaps someone else will help introduce you to new people, maybe. You can perhaps become part of someone else's network of friends. You don't have to put the effort in. From a social perspective, let other people do the work. Scorpio, you are actually quite sociable at the moment. I mean, I think you've been quite sociable in your own way over the last few days, and I think that people are going to trust you. People are going to like you, Scorpio, and you don't actually have to do very much, but you seem to have a good sense of which people get on with which other people. So you may actually have an instinctive ability to create social events which work well. You don't have to do a lot of planning. In fact, it's not a good idea to do planning, by the way. Today is actually a bad day for planning. It's a good day to be spontaneous, though, and to just work out who gets on with who. You can do it, and I think that people will very much appreciate it. Though it may be a day, Scorpio, which has two halves. Now, if you are in the Americas, the moon moves into Cancer this afternoon. Late afternoon if you're in Eastern time zone, early afternoon if you're in the Western time zone, like California, for example. So the moon moving into Cancer is quite a favorable change. Remember, I'm just talking about American Scorpios here. If you are a European or African or an Australian Scorpio, well, moon doesn't really go into Cancer until tomorrow or very late in the day today. But if you're in the Americas, you get this changeover, and you start the day perhaps not really being in the mood for being with people, perhaps because you're just very focused on yourself and things you have to work on, and you don't really want too much engagement. And if you do try to engage with people, you run into this moon square Neptune, and so this moon square Neptune could create I won't say complications, but just confusion. You just won't know how to relate to people, and they won't know how to relate to you. And at the same time, plans could be very vague. Plans could be changed at the last moment. But as the afternoon progresses and as the moon goes into Cancer, you feel more in your element. And this is when your social skills really start to come into their own, and your social skills are about your feelings. Remember, it's not about making plans. It's just feeling what is right, feeling where is the right place to go. Not with any object, not with any purpose. It just feels right. And after that, I think that things should run, I would have said, pretty smoothly. But don't expect too much. It's not a day for huge expectations, and really avoid putting your energy into one thing. Especially if you're working today, or if you're engaged in any business activities. I don't think you'll be successful. And in a way, the more focused you are, the more ambitious you are, the more you try to plan and organize, then the less successful you'll be. Indeed, if you get obsessed with getting a particular outcome, if that really matters to you, and I suppose that could be the case. I mean, Scorpio is a fixed sign. It can really focus on one thing. If you are obsessed with an outcome, a single outcome today, then I think at best you'll be disappointed. At worst, there could be some kind of disaster. Okay, I'm not talking about necessarily a sort of life-threatening disaster or financial ruin, but this isn't unlikely to work out, because the universe doesn't like single-minded obsession today. It's just not going to work. And when energy gets focused that energy very quickly goes wrong. So keep it diffuse, just be subtle. In fact, be vague. It's okay to be vague. And I understand that Scorpio is not really a vague sign, but a bit of vagueness and spontaneity certainly would be a very good idea. Sagittarius. I'm not convinced, Sagittarius, that you're really in the mood for doing very much, particularly as the day progresses. You've got your own priorities, and I understand if you're an American Sagittarius or in the United States, there might be things going on relating to Independence Day, but I don't think that that's going to have much of an impact on you. I don't think you're going to be particularly impressed, and as the day progresses, it just becomes more so. So the day starts with the moon in Gemini, and then it moves into Cancer. It might move into Cancer. If you're in Australasia, or in fact Eurasia as well, Eurasia, Australasia, moon is actually going to be in Gemini all day. And so what that would mean is that, you understand that people are important. You understand that other people have an impact on you. But you're wondering, is it worth the effort? And I think that certain people could be very disappointing. It may feel that no one's applying to anything. The moon is, the moon is making a square to Saturn, which you might feel if you're in Australia or New Zealand. Then it makes a square to Neptune. And it's just a general sense of disappointment that perhaps other people promise so much, but in terms of delivery, nothing much happens. And you can try your hardest to make things happen, but you'll be just chasing one thing after another, and the chase will lead nowhere. So perhaps you just need to just accept the situation. And then the moon moves into Cancer. Now, the moon moving into Cancer is something that American Sagittarians are going to be feeling, and this happens over the course of the afternoon. And so with the moon moving into Cancer, you start kind of becoming more serious and more introspective, and starting to think about perhaps how complicated things are. And there may be certain issues which you think, maybe you need to attend to this now, even though it's July the 4th, because if you don't deal with it now, then you're going to have to deal with it tomorrow. And should you be wasting your time enjoying yourself, celebrating something, whatever, getting deafened by fireworks? Should you be wasting your time on that? Probably not. And I think it's going to be quite difficult for you to be the life and soul of the party. And if you are the life and soul of the party, if you do start enjoying yourself, maybe you're a younger or more extroverted Sagittarian, where's it going to lead? I don't think it'll lead anywhere good. So I'm sorry to be so downbeat, almost a bit puritanical, but I'm just not convinced about today. I think that I'm not convinced about today as a social experience. As a social experience, I do think that today could actually be very disappointing. So maybe you should not treat today as a social experience. You should, do what you feel is important for you, and leave the fun and games to others. Capricorn. It kind of depends where you are. if you are in Australasia or Eurasia, the moon is essentially moving through the last degrees of Gemini. And I think from a Capricorn view, that means that you're going to feel that there are things that you would like to finish off. That's the first point. Secondly, you might be aware of other people's limitations. The moon is ruler of Cancer, which is your opposite sign. And so the moon is making a square to Saturn. You're going to feel that really particularly strongly if you're in Australasia, New Zealand. Maybe not so much if you're in Europe. I'll be coming to America later, by the way. Then the moon makes a square to Saturn, and that's perhaps a sense of disappointment and an awareness that perhaps you and other people don't fully get on with each other, that there is a difference of opinion, and you may actually regard certain people as being really quite trivial, just focusing on the wrong things and not realizing that, it's a serious business. Yeah, life is a serious business. And you may at the same time feel that you're not being respected as much as you should be. And then the moon, having made this square to Saturn, it makes a square to Neptune. Now, this square to Neptune is more general. I'm talking about everyone here with this moon square Neptune, wherever you are in the world. That moon square Neptune, it just may occur to you that really some people just can't be trusted. Now, it may be a short-term thing, but you'll just see people for what they are, and you'll see how they're behaving, what they're saying, whether they're honouring their promises or not. And it may all be a little bit depressing. And which goes back to the point which I think I've said in the past for Capricorns, is that the only person that you can really trust is you yourself, and I think that might be what you feel. But don't despair. The moon does move into Cancer, and if you're in the Americas, it moves into Cancer this afternoon. If you're not in the Americas, it's more about tomorrow, the moon moving into Cancer. So if you're an American Capricorn, with the moon moving into Cancer, that happens over the afternoon. And there is a somewhat decisive change there with the moon moving from Gemini to Cancer. I think that it's fortunate. If we see the moon as representing other people, you may find that people are more reliable once the moon moves into Cancer. Yeah, the moon rules Cancer, and so it's quite well placed. And so actually there are certain people who can be trusted, and maybe from a perspective of relationships, again, if you're an American Cancerian, then by the end of the day you may realize that after all someone can be trusted, that perhaps things weren't as disappointing as they seemed at the beginning of the day. But it is early days. The moon is just moving into Cancer. So in the last part of the day, it might just feel that things are starting, but they never really develop. So if you're socializing at the end of the day, Capricorn, I don't think you should be socializing at the beginning of the day. I don't think that would work out. I don't think that would feel satisfactory. If you are socializing at the end of the day, you may feel that things are developing, things are okay, but they don't actually go anywhere. And so there may be a certain feeling that things were sort of arrested at the wrong moment. But don't worry. As the moon moves into Cancer, tomorrow the moon will be gathering strength in Cancer, and I think that you may get a better impression of what's happening in the world. But today, as I said, I'm not convinced that it's going to be a fantastic day. I don't think it's going to be a terrible day. I think in general it's going to be a better day if you're an American Cancerian than, sorry, it's going to be a better day if you're an American Capricorn than if you're a Capricorn who lives in the rest of the world. Aquarius. Is it an Aquarian day? I mean, what kind of day is good for an Aquarius? Well, the beginning of the day, we do see the moon in Gemini, which is an air sign, but the moon is leaving Gemini. It's about to move into Cancer. And so you just might feel really that the action has already happened, and that really it's all done. And so you may just not really feel that there's any point. And I think it's okay to feel that way. The moon in Gemini is making a square to Neptune. I think that you can be vaguely creative. You might feel that you're doing something useful that sort of makes the most of your talents, but it doesn't feel entirely satisfactory. I think Aquarius, you're just going to feel that you've already done your best work, and that as far as today is concerned, it's finishing things off, and there's no point really in getting particularly excited about anything, though. Saturn is squaring the Sun-Uranus midpoint. Now, that could be relevant to you, Aquarius. Saturn is your ruler. And with Saturn squaring the Sun-Uranus midpoint, there is the possibility of something happening today that you just simply were not expecting. Aquarians have expectations. It's a fixed sign. You want things to happen in a particular way. You maybe make plans because of this expectation. But with Saturn squaring Sun-Uranus, something might happen that you just hadn't planned for. Or maybe someone behaves in a way that you hadn't planned for. Now, is this a good or a bad thing? Well, I think it depends. If you are of a very rigid mindset, then I think it might actually be a bad thing, because you just will not know how to respond. You might just be thrown, and the wrong response could turn a neutral event into a negative event. On the other hand, if you are open-minded and you are looking for excitement and you're prepared to treat every event as a possibility, then this Saturn square Sun-Uranus may be quite exciting. You may see an exciting opportunity. It may be an opportunity perhaps involving another person. Someone does something you weren't expecting, and you may actually see this as an opportunity, and so you may actually be given a chance to prove yourself, or a chance perhaps to make a new relationship. But it will not be predictable. Who knows? Anything is possible. And I suppose this is a reminder that Mercury is now gathering strength in Leo, which is your opposite sign. Okay, Mercury's been in Leo for a couple of days, but just a reminder that when Mercury is moving through Leo, your opposite sign, this is a time to be considering what other people are doing and what other people are saying. Their words could have an impact on you. Indeed, their decisions could have an impact on you. And so by recognizing that you are not in complete control, and perhaps considering the possibility that something from the outside could change things and could give you a new direction, you'll be preparing yourself. And so going back to this surprise event, just be open-minded and don't have any fixed response. You have to really have, I suppose, a certain amount of situational awareness, see this thing coming, whatever it is, and then be able to respond in an appropriate way. And if you are in the Americas, then this afternoon the moon moves from Gemini into Cancer. And I would have said that with the moon in Cancer, you perhaps have to look after yourself. You need a certain sense of routine, and you don't want to break your routine. I know it's Independence Day, but that's no excuse for breaking your routine. And one routine that you don't want to break is diet. And so if you have a particular diet that you're used to, that you're happy with, you're comfortable with, you might feel, oh, it's Independence Day, you can maybe do something different, eat something different. I wouldn't recommend it. Just eat what you usually eat. It's not a time for experimenting with a diet or drink or anything else, because I think the experiment might not work. It might not be good for you. And it's just no good saying, oh, well, it's once a year. No, or whatever. No, you have to be persistent. And if you make a change to your diet, or you make a change to what's happening to your body, whether it's breathing in stuff that you shouldn't be breathing in, suddenly going to an environment where you might have allergies, whatever, you want to keep things simple, and you want to keep going with what works. So yeah, not a time for experimentation, not a time for taking risks. So by looking after your body, you will be in control, and there won't be regrets later on. And also, you need good organization today. Okay, it's tomorrow. If you're not in the Americas, the moon will move and be in Cancer at a certain stage. Good organization matters. Everything has to, as far as possible, be planned, and you don't want chaos. Although I understand I remember what I just said about this Saturn aspecting the Sun square, the Sun-Uranus midpoint. Yeah, sure, you need flexibility to be able to deal with a sudden event. So I'm not saying you have to have completely rigid plans. So you've got to be able to make space for something unexpected. But at the same time, good organization today, certainly late in the day and into tomorrow, is going to be really important. Pisces, the day might have a slow start because the moon is in Gemini, and so the moon actually might be in Gemini all day long if you're in Australia and New Zealand, the moon, and Europe and Africa and Asia, in fact everywhere that's not America, pretty much. Okay, the moon leaves Gemini at I think something like 9 minutes to 10 in the evening in London, but outside the Americas it's a moon in Gemini day. And if you're in the Americas, then yeah, this afternoon moon moves into Cancer. So that does make a difference in terms of what you're doing. And I do understand that it is Independence Day, and I said I don't really know what people do on Independence Day, but if enjoyment is important to you and you are an American Pisces, then I would suggest that you wait until the moon moves into Cancer before doing anything, before socializing. I think that the moon moves into Cancer on the East Coast, sort of just before 5 o'clock in the afternoon, just before, if you're on the West Coast, just before 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So don't do too much before then, because the moon will be in Gemini, and also the moon will be square Neptune. And I think that moon square Neptune could be a bit of a problem. And that moon square Neptune really affects all of us, regardless of our time zone. That moon square Neptune is a key feature of what is happening today. Certainly if you're a Pisces, because Neptune is moving through Pisces, which is of course your sign, and moon square Neptune indicates a certain chaos, a certain lack of direction, and you may not know quite what you're supposed to be doing. And if you're at home, your family may be giving off mixed signals, and you may actually not know what your family are up to, and there is a possibility of misunderstandings. So if you are communicating with your family, not just immediate family, distant family as well perhaps, make sure that everyone is clear. Make sure everyone has understood each other. And if necessary, ask people to repeat themselves. If you tell someone to do something, perhaps get them to repeat it back to you, because they might not have got your message first time. And it works both ways. If someone tells you to do something, repeat it back to them, just in case you've misunderstood it. And also, with moon square Neptune, I suppose things going on in the home, whatever activities going on in the home, whether it's cooking, washing, could be socializing, I suppose, whatever is happening with that moon square Neptune, things could go wrong. Real caution is required. It's going to be difficult. Details can be ignored, so make a special effort to make sure that all of the details are covered. That way, it can be a relatively smooth day. Now, if you're an American Cancerian, if you're an American Piscean, if you're an American Piscean, when the moon moves into Cancer, that's when the day really starts if you want to enjoy yourself. So over the afternoon, as the moon moves into Cancer, you're going to feel more relaxed. You're going to be a nicer person. You're going to be more sociable, and it's going to be easier to enjoy yourself. And, by the end of the day, if you're in America, you can be quietly enjoying yourself. But don't expect fireworks, even if there are fireworks. I think it's still a relatively low-key day. In fact, I think it should be a relatively low-key day for everyone, regardless of their sign. Anyway, those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. I'm sorry I've been a bit downbeat, that I haven't been especially positive, but I'm just telling you what I see. I don't actually think that it's a very exciting day, a very interesting day, even though it is, in America, is Independence Day. And what is the most important aspect? Moon square Neptune, creating a bit of confusion there, not knowing what's going on, plus the fact you've got Sun conjunct Hades on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. Don't put too much energy into anything and into one single task. put loads of energy into something and it could go wrong. Be a little more relaxed. It doesn't have to be done today. Too much energy causes problems. And that seems to be, to me, an important message for today. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was number 42, increase. Now, this hexagram does not move. It is locked. There's no moving lines. Now, one view of a locked hexagram is that things are not really going anywhere. It's not good or it's not bad. It's just going nowhere. And I think this may reflect today. When we look at the astrology for today, I didn't find it to be especially exciting. Not a lot to say. Moon square Saturn, Moon square Neptune, then Moon goes into Cancer. Moon doesn't really make any aspects while it's moving through early Cancer. So the question is, where are things going? And I think with this locked hexagram, it doesn't matter what the number is, whether what the name of this hexagram is. So just the fact that it's locked, no moving lines, just indicates to me that today might be a little bit of a damp squib. And I mean, I know that's sad if you're in the Americas, if it's, Independence Day, all that kind of stuff. People like to have fun on Independence Day, but, this is only for people watching this video. It's not for everyone in general, but I don't think it's going to be a great Independence Day. Nothing to write home about. Still, it's 42, which is increase. It is a favourable hexagram. It does indicate that there are things we can do to make our life better, and we can focus on what's good and we can start bringing it into our life. And if there are things that are bad, we can start divesting ourselves from them. We can get rid of the bad and start to focus on what is good for us, what is life affirming. And it's not just us, it's everyone else. We can do things to make things better for the people around us, and really everyone can benefit. But we shouldn't expect amazing things, because this hexagram, it does not move. And I think in some ways, because it's not moving, perhaps what we're doing is we're stabilizing something, because the nuclear hexagram of increase is splitting apart. This is not what this hexagram is about. Splitting apart, yes, is a negative hexagram. It's about things collapsing. The forces of evil are getting everywhere. Nothing is working. It's a state of total decay. But this is perhaps the underlying picture. So this is what we're coming from, perhaps. This is what we're trying to avoid. This is what we're trying to recover from, even. And so when we look at increase, it's increase because we're creating a distance between ourselves and everything that is perhaps wrong with the world, particularly in the past, and we're able to make things better for ourselves. And it may even be a sense of recovery here, that we can perhaps recover from what's happened in the past and build ourselves up, and also build up everyone else. Now, from a material perspective, it depends on what you're coming into this question with. Increase can be about increase in terms of what you own. It could be a financial increase. So if you have been looking for a financial opportunity, or you want more money and there's an opportunity to get more money, that's what increase can bring. But increase can be about our knowledge, it can be about our experience, and it also can be about our friends. We can start to interact with people who are supportive and can do us good. So it may be a time for making new contacts. But whatever it is, whatever the sum total of our life is, today we can actually take action to increase it. But it's a locked hexagram, so we can't expect incredible things to happen. But maybe that's a good thing, because bearing in mind the nuclear hexagram of splitting apart, perhaps what we're being given here is some much needed stability. And that's it. Very short, but it's a locked hexagram. I don't want to say more than I have to about it. And I'm now going to turn to the astrology, and I haven't got anything particularly planned except for just looking at the United States chart. And that's how I want to start. I mean, I've looked at the United States chart on numerous occasions. And as it's Independence Day, I thought I would just look at it again and just talk about all the things that maybe I've discussed over the last year, and perhaps try to bring them together. Now, I would warn you that this is an incredibly prejudiced view of the United States. Of course it's prejudiced. We're all prejudiced. This is my subjective view of the US. So if you're a patriotic American, don't take it to heart. It's just me. So don't. I'm not really trying to upset anyone. And I will try to focus also on some of the good things about the US, particularly its Saturn. The US has got a great Saturn. So okay, so I'm just going to talk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the American chart, and then I'm going to just go over what I see as perhaps some of the main events happening over this year, and perhaps a couple of events happening later than that. Okay, so here is the American chart. Now, it is a controversial chart because, in the sense that people complain that we don't know the exact time. The most common time used for looking at the American chart is, by astrologers, is 10 past 5 in the afternoon, and it's called the Sibley chart. Sibley was an astrologer, I think, in the 19th century who popularized this chart, and this chart has kind of stuck, and this is the chart I'm going with. I had an astrology teacher. Her name was Olivia Barclay, and I did her course in horoscope, and she was absolutely insistent that the USA had Gemini rising and not Sagittarius rising. And I think, if I've got it right, her argument was that, I mean, I'm not going to justify this argument. Her argument was that Americans just drive everywhere, they don't walk. And so, therefore, the USA has Gemini rising. That was her view. But to be honest, I'm fairly confident that the USA has Sagittarius rising. And it is a Cancerian country, and it's got loads of planets in Cancer, and I suppose one starts with Cancer, and I do think it really is a Cancerian country. I think when one thinks about Cancer, one thinks about perhaps the myth of Cancer. There's big emphasis on it's quite a sentimental country, but at least from an outsider's view, there's a lot of sentimentality, and there's a lot of emphasis on the family, and it may be a fake emphasis on the family, but Americans go on and on about the family and the clan and what it is to be American. And it was Margaret Thatcher who, Margaret Thatcher got into a lot of trouble for saying that there's no such thing as society. And the British Prime Minister, and I think she said something like, well, you just have your family and you look after your own family. And I don't know whether that really applied to the United Kingdom, but I do think that to an extent it applies to the US, that we all have, people in America, they all have their little patches of dirt, property ownership. That really matters, isn't it? And I suppose people come to America, I suppose they've been escaping persecution very often, religious persecution, and they come to America and they find their little piece of dirt, and that's what it's about, having that sun in Cancer. And you should respect people's little piece of dirt, and property rights are important. And it's not just about the land on which people exist. It's also about their beliefs, and they have their beliefs, perhaps their religious beliefs or their particular perspective on society, and you just leave them alone to do it, because that's their lots of little crabs. Cancer is a sign of a crab, and then that feeds into that moon in Aquarius, because moon in Aquarius and Cancer are just these two signs that are so different from each other. But in some ways, America sort of merges the Cancer and the Cancer and Aquarius, doesn't it? It's like Aquarius respects people's independence. You can do what you like, provided you don't mess with me. And that seems to me to be Moon in Aquarius with Sun in Cancer. You have your little piece of dirt, your little piece of land, your little ideological barrio, and you just stay there, and provided you don't mess with me, that is fine. And so I do think that Aquarius, the Cancer Aquarius thing, does work very well. But from a perspective of an immigrant, I think one can see Cancer in another sense. Cancer is about protection, and it's about hoarding, and it's about ownership. Now, I understand that people, well, if you believe the right-wing media, I've never been to the border, but apparently everyone is just piling across the border in their hundreds of thousands. There's no border controls. Well, I don't know. I'm just taking what the right-wing media say. I said I've never been to the border, but if you are a legal immigrant, I immigrated to this country legally. I have a green card. It's actually really difficult to get into this country. Really difficult. There's a load of paperwork. It takes years. You have to get a medical. You have to, you have interviews. It's really hard work getting into this country, and so that's one aspect of a Cancerian country, asking all these questions about, have you taken drugs? Have you ever been a communist? Crimes of moral turpitude, all of this kind of thing that they ask questions about. And it's as if this is a defense system, and it's trying to stop anyone coming into the country who might be dangerous. And so I know every country has that to an extent, but I think it's stronger with the US than in other places. And you've got to be the right person, and you mustn't lie. Of course, I know, again, with every place you mustn't lie, but you've got to go through all these hoops, and this is about a very defensive country. But then, what happens when you actually get into the country? When you get into the country, you see Cancer again in terms of how it treats its population. Once you're in the country wants to hold on to you. The idea is it's a one-way journey. People come into the country, they don't leave. It's very difficult to leave, there is a huge amount of control. Like, for example, if you have got assets of over $10,000, you have to do assets over $10,000 which are held outside the United States. You have to do this thing called an F-bar, where you have to report your assets every year, and because America wants to know. At the same time, America likes to control what you're doing with your money. I mean, look at how America asks these questions about financial services that are outside America. American residents and citizens are just not allowed to put their money in places. Okay, they're not themselves restricted, but anyone that has American clients can have really heavy fines. So America, that's a very Cancerian thing, really wanting to control its population in a financial sense, and it doesn't really want people to leave, particularly if they've got money. It's very difficult to leave America. You're not going to be easily able to leave, and so there is this exit tax. Okay, I don't have $2 million, but if I had more than $2 million and I wanted to leave the United States, if I had more than $2 million of assets, I would have to pay, I believe, an exit tax of 40% of the excess over $2 million in order to leave. In other words, that's a very Cancerian thing. It likes to hoard its population. It likes to hang on to its population, particularly its population who has more than $2 million. And that's just quite an extraordinary thing, having that exit tax. So, and I think it feels like a very Cancerian thing. Cancer is like some sort of mother that likes to hold on to its population and likes to control them, especially in a financial sense. And so, yes, it is a bit of a one-way journey coming to America. What's a bourne from which no man returns? Isn't that something like that? You don't return from it. That's the idea. Although someone remarked that the American dream has been in transformation, and now the American dream is to leave America, but things have changed. So that is one aspect of the United States. And as you can see, there's a lot of prejudice there on my part. Another key aspect of the United States is the fact that it has got a Mars-Uranus conjunction on the 7th house cusp, assuming that the United States really was born at, 10 past 5 in the afternoon. And I've mentioned this on numerous occasions, but I think that Mars-Uranus conjunction is about the projection of violence and terror. America is obsessed with terrorism. I suppose you can perhaps see, going back to the point about immigration and all these questions you were asked when are you a communist and all of this. I suppose there was a time, 100 years ago and more, where anarchists came from Europe, and they came to Europe and they started blowing things up. And I was an Italian anarchist. They would cause trouble. And I think even in America, one of the American presidents wasn't he killed by an Italian anarchist or by an anarchist from Europe? So I suppose you can understand that they might be concerned about terrorists from abroad. But it seems to be really hardwired into the American chart, this Mars-Uranus opposition, this Mars-Uranus conjunction, seeing terrorism everywhere. And it's kind of projected. And I think that what's happened since the Second World War is that the United States has projected its own capacity to be a terrorist. And I think that with the United States' obsession with regime change, it wants to change. It has an idea about the way the world should be, and it's not actually become aware of the fact it itself, to an extent, has become a terrorist state. American actions have directly or indirectly caused terrorism, even supporting the Taliban, supporting the freedom fighters against the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. That gave birth to Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, and led in the end to the Twin Towers. So that's one aspect of it. You've had America blowing up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, that pipeline sending gas from Russia to Germany. It seems that America really did blow it up. So that is an act of terrorism. Yet here is America with this Mars-Uranus conjunction, sort of projecting its fear of terrorism. It's terrified of terrorism, but the real terrorist in the room is actually the United States itself. And in terms of its America's belief in itself, belief that it's right, the United States has Jupiter in Cancer. It's quite a strong Jupiter. It's exalted in Cancer, and I think that Jupiter in Cancer is about morality. Jupiter is a very moral planet. It has a strong sense of right and wrong. It believes it's right. It believes that philosophically its way of running itself is the right way for everyone. And so that moralism, I suppose, does to an extent work in terms of the United States itself. It might be fake moralism, but remember, this is a country that had prohibition. That's an extraordinary thing to have prohibition. That might be Jupiter in Cancer, the morality of the country, feeling it has moral virtues which are exceptional, and of course imposing those virtues on other people. That it has got its way of running a country, and that is the right way to do it. And that's Jupiter in Cancer in the Placidus 7th house. That's saying how people should run their countries. And if we don't like the way you run your country, then we'll try to overthrow you. That can happen. But with Cancer, it sounds as if it's moral, but in fact with Cancer there's always keen self-interest. And so that's what ultimately motivates America. You think that they want to overthrow Saddam Hussein because it's the right moral thing to do, but of course the reality, it's about self-interest, money, oil, power, the dollar, and that's perhaps Sun in Cancer. That's all those planets in Cancer. Cancer always has a keen sense of its own self-interest. Now, the strongest planet in America's chart is that Saturn in Libra. It's exalted in Libra, and it works very well. One can criticize America all one likes, but actually America's quite an old country now. A lot of countries have disappeared, but America's been around for a long time. You've had continued government. You have not had revolutions since 1776. You've had civil war, but you've had continuity. One president follows another president, and it's just continued. And by and large, you have the rule of law. And I think that's Saturn in Libra. And you could say that is something about perhaps the Constitution. The Constitution is still around. It's still there. I think it's getting frayed at the edges. Rather like the Roman, I suppose, the Republican Roman Constitution, in which the whole of which America really based its own constitution on. And you could say that Saturn in Libra is the constitution. It's about the power of the government. I suppose you could see from a Roman concept, the fasces, that the origin of fascism, the word fascist, you have the axe surrounded by those staves of wood. That's Saturn in Libra, but it is also the constitution, and it's a strong Saturn. It's strong not just because it's exalted in Libra, because assuming America was born at 5:10 p.m., it's a daytime planet. It's a diurnal planet, Saturn. Daytime chart. It's above the horizon. It's in a masculine sign, so it's a great Saturn, and that Saturn has just kept the whole thing together. It's really strong, and Saturn is square the Sun. I think that Saturn square Sun is quite a dominating aspect. It's quite a restrictive aspect, but it's kept the country going. And so, when one can always say that one wants to go somewhere else, that America is a terrible country, but where actually would you want to go? I mean, these people think, is it really the American dream to leave America now? But yeah, where would you want to go? Europe's not great. Europe seems to be falling apart. So it's always so easy to criticize America, but yeah, you've got to ask where is better, and I think you might have problems in that department. I find the Neptune interesting, though. Neptune is in Virgo. Now, Neptune supposedly is about religion, and the United States, I always thought, was a religious country, this country full of churches. Yet it's got Neptune in Virgo. Neptune doesn't work well in Virgo. I mean, Virgo is about details, getting the details right, making sure that everything fits together, but it's an earth sign, and yet Neptune is all about the big picture. It's about God. It's about how we transcend. How can you possibly transcend in Virgo? You cannot transcend in Virgo. It is impossible. And I think that is perhaps a problem in terms of American religion. I am not convinced that the United States is quite as religious as it claims, and I think that it's a Cancer country. Cancer is all about self-interest. It's about people, again, defending their patches of dirt, and I just feel more than other places that religion is very often about defending your patch of dirt, and religion, and I know it's always the case, we all do it, but I think in America, perhaps more than other places, God is created in man's own image, and I think that Neptune in Virgo is really kind of what it's all about. Now, there is a question of elements. From an elemental point of view, the United States chart is totally out of whack. It doesn't have any planets in Earth, unless you count Neptune in Virgo, which I don't count because Neptune in Virgo it's a generational planet. That's the first point. And it actually doesn't have any planets in fire. And in other words, unless you count North Node and Leo, in other words, it's all about air and water. And how do you piece that all together? Well, firstly, the lack of Earth, I think, is really, really important. Donald Trump doesn't have any Earth, by the way. And Donald Trump actually has a lot of planets in Cancer. He has Mercury in Cancer, he has, I think, Venus in Cancer, and he has Saturn in Cancer. He's got no Earth. So he's a real American. But what happens if you've got no Earth? There are two responses to having no Earth. You can just be very sort of unattached. You can just float off. You're not tied to anything. It can perhaps help you become more spiritual if you have no Earth. But there can also be the compensation aspect of having no Earth. And I think that that's what we're seeing here with America. There's serious compensation going on. America doesn't have any Earth, so it needs to make a special effort to have Earth, to have grounding. And it's not actually a very grounded chart. Yes, it's got the only planet, but the only traditional planet below the horizon is the moon. Most of the stuff is above the horizon. It's not a grounded chart. It's got, as I said, no Earth, unless you count Neptune in Virgo, which, as I said, which I don't count. And so I think we're seeing serious compensation here. So this obsession, for example, with property rights, and is just really incredible. More so than other places, because there's a sense of compensation. We don't really have a real sense for the land on which we are. There's no sense of what is America, the environment. Earth is environment. The America, they don't have a clue about the environment, really. I know people make comments about climate change and all of this, but there's no real environmental awareness as far as I can see. It's just being torn apart. The Earth is just not seen as a resource which needs to be really looked after. There's no concept of Earth, and I think that there is this lack of grounding, and you try to find, America, I think, tries to find grounding in sort of fake ways. This obsession with the community, families. In America, I don't think there is much sense of community, really. It's going back to Thatcher's comment, that Margaret Thatcher saying it is just a country of, the society doesn't exist, actually. Really saying community doesn't exist. It's actually about, again, people's little patches of dirt, and that's really what it's about. I don't think there's any great sense of community, and it's all about individuals' self-interest. And, going back to the lack of Earth, what unites America? Well, it's that flag, isn't it? And I mean, I'm just concerned that you see flags everywhere. I think that's worrying. It's kind of, the lady doth protest too much. It's like saying if you have these flags everywhere, that suggests there's a problem. It suggests there's a certain insecurity here. If you were really secure, you had Earth in your chart, you were grounded, you wouldn't need to fly the flags all the time. But I think the flags there's so many flags in the United States is actually a sign of national insecurity. The lack of fire, that's more difficult to say. What does it mean for the lack of fire? I suppose one of the stereotypes of Americans, probably an untrue stereotype, is the loud American, very fiery, making a lot of noise. Maybe America is trying too hard on that case, but maybe one just needs to see it in terms of the rational and the irrational axis. So Carl Jung said that, according to Carl Jung, you had the rational axis, which represents the rational axis is thinking and feeling. In other words, you could say earth and water, which America has. The rational axis is completely there. The irrational axis, which is sensation and intuition, sensation is earth and fire, the irrational axis is empty. So the USA is a rational country. But what do we mean by rational? What do Jung mean by rational? What rational means is that you can work things out in your own head. You don't actually need to worry about what things feel like. You don't need to worry about the earth or your intuition. You don't have to worry about that. it's all about working it out in your head in a rational sense. And rationality is arguably the opposite to being empirical, to empiricism. You can actually work things out without reference to what is going on out there. So you can logically work out a constitution. You can logically work out a set of laws. You can logically work out, guilt, and in a legal system, you can work out logically who's guilty, who's not guilty. You can do it all logically, and you can trust your feelings, your heart, and your brain together can work it all out without any reference to actually what's happening materially or what's happening intuitively, because the material world and that intuitive world, being able to touch God, for example, that's not the American experience. It's about just working it out with your head and your heart. So that would mean, for example, I remember there was, when the death penalty was a really big thing, and someone saying the point is someone can be executed, and the key point is that the law has been followed. And if the law has been followed, then it's okay for them to be executed. Whether or not they actually did the crime is beside the point, because you can work it all out logically. Provided the process is working, it is fine. Now, from an environmental perspective, it's the same thing. Looking at the way the environment is treated, certainly in this city where I am and this county, provided you go through the process. So you can actually say that an environment is you can have a statement that it's saying it's not significant. There is no environmental impact, and you can do that in a legal sense. You just have to tick the boxes, and that's done. Whether or not it is significant, it doesn't matter. So through this rational approach, you can convince yourself of all kinds of stuff, and you can end up destroying the environment because you don't actually need to worry about what the environment actually is, what it actually feels like. Whether you develop on a wetland and cause absolute chaos. It's not chaos. You destroy a wetland forever. You build over it, you concrete over it. It doesn't matter, provided you've gone through the rules, and you can basically say that it's going to have not going to have significant impact, and that's it. And it's a legal process. And I understand that other countries do a similar thing, but I think in America, United States, it is more of a problem, and I think that there is a certain sort of complete lack of grounding there, plus a lack of intuition. There is a lack of a connection, I think, with God, and it goes back to Jung's point. Jung, who was a very intuitive person, being a Leo, he said that he didn't believe in God because he knew that God was there. It's just that knowledge. And I just think that knowledge, that feeling, this is the way it is somehow missing in America. And I think that's perhaps shows the United States' lack of fire. And so that's why you've got a country that is so reliant on legal, rational processes. So those are a few thoughts on the United States, and I suppose I should turn my attention to what's happening right now. We've got solar return coming up, haven't we? So here is the United States' solar return. Oh, it's actually for today. I said it was July the 5th. It's actually July the 4th. And I think that solar returns are important to sort of understand what's going on for America. And there are two things that I find interesting about the solar return. And this solar return, remember, is describing the year ahead for America. We've got this Mars-Uranus conjunction, which is, it's 7 degrees apart, but it's in the seventh house cusp. So this is indicating that this could be a year of conflict. We already know that America is in various conflict situations, particularly in Ukraine, but there are other possibilities. We know about Gaza, we know about Taiwan. I think that's quite a difficult solar return. Additionally, I'm interested by the Sun. The Sun is exactly conjunct Hades at the time of the solar return. And so with that conjunction with Hades, I'm thinking that the Sun might represent the president. Sun, we've got Regulus on the midheaven, and that's the president. And he's conjunct Hades. So this might represent a weak, it represents what we already know. A weak president, a president in decline. So I think it tells us that, it tells us what we know, and it tells us that Biden is going to be an issue. And notice the Sun is actually in the 8th house using the Placidus house system. And so that is a problem. Oh, by the way, this Mars-Uranus conjunction, I should say that Mars is actually quite close to the 7th house cusp. And so the solar return does indicate some problems for the country, further problems. And I've always said that this is going to be a long, hot summer. Of course, the solar return is actually going through to the next year. And we've got this Mars-Uranus conjunction. It becomes exact on July the 15th. Of course, July the 15th is the anniversary of the first atomic bomb, which had a 15th, 16th, mid-July 1945, when there was, I think, also was there a Mars-Uranus conjunction then? Uranus was, there was, Mars was on Algol, not Uranus, but Mars was on Algol at the time of the atomic bomb. Mars is not on Algol yet, but Mars is moving towards Algol. Uranus is pretty much on Algol now. So that solar return is potentially difficult. Now, tomorrow, July the 5th, there is a new moon. So having a new moon so shortly after the solar return on America, just after America's birthday, new moon represents a new tide of affairs. It's a new beginning for America. And when I say new beginning, I don't necessarily mean that in a positive sense. It is something new. And I'll be looking at this new moon in more detail maybe tomorrow, but on the day that it's exact. But new moon is this is set for Washington. Washington D.C. is in the 7th house cusp, so that may represent in the 7th house, and it's square the midheaven. So again, it's all about conflict and how America deals with its enemies. And we get further evidence from this by looking at what's happening with Jupiter. So Jupiter is currently in Gemini, and Jupiter went into Gemini at the end of May. And so Jupiter is currently around 8-9 Gemini, but it is moving towards the conjunction of Uranus, and on July the 20th, 21st, we got Jupiter crossing the United States' descendant. Now you might think, oh, that's a good thing. Jupiter, fortunate planet. Not really, because Jupiter crossing America's descendant just said it highlights something, and it highlights America's enemies, and it highlights the kind of conflicts that America might be getting involved with. And Jupiter keeps moving through Gemini, and Jupiter will eventually get to, it will eventually on October the 9th, Jupiter will go retrograde at 21 degrees 20. So Jupiter goes retrograde conjunct Mars, America's Mars, in the 7th in October. So in the run-up to the presidential election, having Jupiter conjunct Mars, I'd say I don't think that's fortunate. I think it's more about America perhaps using its power in an inappropriate way. One thing about the USA which I didn't point out is Mars square Neptune. So that's about potentially military force and America's use of the military and America's fantasies about the military. And I think that is an important part of America. It does have fantasies about military power. There's an obsession with the military. And so with Jupiter conjunct Mars square Neptune, I don't know, I think that the United States might be tempted to use its military in a way that is perhaps not completely appropriate. Then later in the year, we've got Pluto going. Pluto goes stationary on October the 12th at 2939 Capricorn. It goes stationary direct. So the United States is still in its Pluto return stage. I know that this is when Pluto returns to where it was when the United States was born. Well, the United States is still there. It's still in its Pluto return. And I think that it's a time of total upheaval. Things are still there. Things are still being worked out. England had its Pluto return in the 16th century at a time of when Queen Mary Mary I was persecuting Protestants. That was what was happening when England had its Pluto return. The Pluto return finished, but the Pluto return chaos still continued. And within a few years after the Pluto return, Mary I had gone, and you had a new monarch who herself was a Protestant, Elizabeth I, and then it was the Catholics' turn to be persecuted. And so maybe this is what's going on with this struggle between the left and the right. You've got conservatives, progressives, who's in power. Whoever's in power tries to control everything. So at the moment, Biden's in power, and the progressives are in the ascendancy. But it doesn't take long. If Trump wins, then everything gets reversed. And I know that you're not going to have people getting tortured to death or burnt at the stake like you had in England in the 16th century. But it just shows that you've got these two competing forces with Pluto return who really have nothing in common or feel they have nothing in common. And so we can expect more of that. And even when the Pluto return is over, it will continue for a few years. When it's technically over, it will just carry on. Now, a note for the future. Next year, there is a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So May and June, Saturn and Neptune cross the United States' IC, that deepest part of the chart. Again, assuming that the United States really is born at 5:10 in the afternoon. So with Saturn and Neptune crossing the IC, then, it's a difficult time for the United States. It really is. And the very fundamentals of the country could be under threat. I mean, okay, America is fundamentally not going to be overthrown, but it's going to be a real problem having Saturn and Neptune conjunct the IC. And then we have got Uranus. Uranus in 2026 it moves into Gemini. When Uranus goes into Gemini, the United States tends to be involved in wars. So Uranus was in Gemini in 1776 when the United States was at war with Britain. The next time Uranus was in Gemini was in the 1860s when there was a civil war. Uranus went into Gemini in 1942, just as the Second World War was hotting up. And Uranus is going into Gemini again in 2026. And you will have a Mars-Uranus conjunction. If you look at, for example, at here's America's solar return for July the 5th, 2026, and then you've got Mars-Uranus conjunction. That could represent war, I suppose. It's not exactly on America's descendant, but don't worry, Mars and Uranus will eventually make a conjunction 2 years later, 2028. You have a Mars-Uranus conjunction at, I think it's 2028, around 12 degrees Gemini. So overall, looking at what's happening in America, America seems to be sliding into conflict. Short term, yes, with Jupiter starting to move into Gemini and on America's descendant. Longer term, we've got Uranus soon moving into Gemini, and if the past is any guide, I think that Uranus in Gemini could be extremely dangerous. Okay, I've said enough about America, so I hope I haven't offended anyone. It's been a bit of a rant, but I thought I should say something. It is America's Independence Day, and I must make it clear. As I've said before, people criticize America, but where is a better place? Every country has its problems, and if you're living in America and you want to live the American dream by leaving America, where are you going to go to? Are you going to have a better life somewhere else? Europe is falling apart, for sure. At least America has some, with that Saturn in Libra, it's got a strong Saturn. For all its faults, there's been a continuity of government since 1776, or since the end of the Revolutionary Wars, and it has, because you had the Civil War, but by and large, there has been a continuity, and I think that does count for a lot. So I don't want you to think that I'm being entirely negative about this country. And also, the biggest thing, the best thing about America is the First Amendment. And I know people criticize the First Amendment and say that it's not, in practice, it's not necessarily working as well as it should do. But as far as freedom of speech is concerned, you're probably more able to say what you think in America than anyone else in the country. So I thought I'd end on a positive note there. Okay, well, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, I'd be grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be very grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. And yeah, happy Independence Day, and thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.